Hello again, and welcome back to A Shark's Perspective. Still, one of the hottest topics and trends today is empathy. Trendy topic or not, it should be natural and timeless, but at least it's time to pause and think more about it and make some change. But what does empathy mean to you, your career, your relationships with your boss, your company, the org chart, or most important for your customer? How do you show the C-suite that not being mean is good for profitability? Not just from doing what's so often been handed down with bad habits, when we know well that mean people suck. So we're welcoming back a previous guest from episode 101 for a great part 2 with Michael Brenner, who is the CEO of the Marketing Insider Group, a CMO influencer, keynote speaker, leading voice on B2B and Content Marketing, and the author of the new book, Mean People Suck. And on this episode, we'll discuss how to create more of a customer-centric and empathetic focus, how to deal with difficult bosses and peers, demonstrate more empathy personally, how it can lead to higher profits, and a lot more. So let's tune into a marketer with empathy as he speaks with an empathetic shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Michael, welcome back to A Shark's Perspective. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, for those that don't remember, you're an OG from way back, a whopping like 9 months ago when you were on the show.
That's right.
Seems like it's been longer than that, and that's why I babbled first half hour of our conversation just catching up. But for the folks that haven't listened to every episode, especially yours, brief overview of your background and your 53 jobs in your
That's
career,
right.
all in a minute or two or less.
Yeah, well, Shark, thanks for having
Of
me
course.
again. It's awesome to be back. Yeah, so 53 jobs, huh? Yeah, it's funny. I started in the book Mean People Suck, which just came out a couple of days ago, as I think you know, but for your audience, I talk about the 53 jobs and how I needed a pair of sneakers when I was in seventh grade, and my parents said, if you want those, you need to go get a job, and so I did, and that's how the journey started. But basically, 25-year career, sales and marketing, executive leadership position, board positions on a couple startups, and went out on my own about 5 years ago, and really helping companies to achieve return on investment without breaking their bank, without finding new budget, just eliminating the crap that doesn't work, focusing on customer value, and showing results. And I wrote the book The Content Formula to tell people how they could get return on investment for marketing. And then I turned that around and realized that you can give people the math all day, but if you don't help them see that they need to transform
Yeah.
their culture, and that marketers really need to redefine what we do. We need to think of what we do as strategic, and so I think that that's part of why I wrote Mean People Suck, is because cultures of empathy that focus on customers deliver more return on investment. So that's kind of the long story short of my career.
Well, what was the epiphany moment that you had that inspired you to write this book? I mean, what was that moment that you thought, my life sucks, my boss sucks, they suck, wah? What was your wah moment that inspired you to write Mean People Suck?
Yeah, it was it's actually a funny moment. I was the first moment. I was at a conference called Content Marketing World. I had just been named the first head of content marketing at SAP, and it was a VP title. And I was, pretty happy and proud. And it's tough to get a VP title at a company like SAP.
Yeah.
Like a lot of, it's not like banking, um, or as my old boss used to say, the air is thin at the top of certain companies.
Yeah.
And uh,
Could have gone to
and I
work
was
for an
walk,
agency.
yeah, exactly.
Every
And I was
20-year
walking
old's a
down the street.
VP.
Yeah, right. So I'm walking down the street, and I met someone actually from an agency, a really nice woman, and we were talking, and we got to the networking event, and she was about to head inside, and she said, "Well, it was really nice talking to you, and it's great to see an executive who doesn't have a big ego. I'd love to learn more about how you've been successful." And in that greeting goodbye, farewell, she shocked me in a number of ways. Number one, I didn't consider myself an executive. Um, and number two, I didn't really consider myself as successful. And so, um, we all, I think, have a list of things that we want to accomplish. And I hadn't, really gotten there. So anyway, I started thinking like, well, how many jobs have I actually had? And have I, why have I seen success and been promoted and achieved this, new role and anything? And then I started looking, and I saw it was 53 jobs. Technically, if you read the book, you'll see it's 52. My 53rd job is husband, coach,
Yeah.
therapist, etc. But anyway, so I just thought, why did I have so many roles and positions only if, I didn't have 52 companies I worked for, but I had a number of roles inside a few companies. And it really came down to, I never really left because I didn't like the company. And I never really left because I hated my job. I usually liked some element of it. Most of the time I left because I didn't like my manager. And I say that with some caveat to respect the amazing managers I did have, and I mentioned them in the book at some level. Um, but most of the movement I had in my career, like many people, was, I left my manager, who in the book I even talk about how some of the worst ones I had became friends of mine later,
Really?
because I came to realize, yeah, like there's a guy that my kids had a nickname for because I complain about him all the time. And as soon as I stopped working for him, we became friends. We had to work together. And I learned that he had kids and he was a coach, and he was a devoted husband, and was actually a lot of fun to hang out with.
Yeah.
And it was just like, I was like, if only I knew that when I worked for him, I think we would have had a different relationship. And so empathy, the book Mean People Suck, is really not a complaint. It's actually a call to action for anyone who feels victim of a mean company, a mean boss, a mean client base, to say, if you just stop feeling sorry for yourself and pointing your finger at other people for being miserable, and have a little bit of empathy for any of them, you can really start to change your life and start to see things in a new perspective. And so that was really um, the personal insight that led me to create the book. But as I mentioned, the larger business reason was basically, um, the reason why the clients I have aren't doing what I tell them to do, and the strategy work that we do, is because they have a culture that resists good ideas. They have a culture that exists to largely support what people say. Like,
Hmm.
hey, why did you do these 5 things that didn't work? I did them because somebody told me to. We're both mutual friends with somebody named Ginger Shrimp, and I talk about, when I joined an enterprise software company, and I won't name them, but I was asked to find the most successful programs out of a group of about 50 different marketing managers. And 50 marketing managers in total had a couple $1 million in budget. And there were very few, less than 10% of marketing managers in this group, that had any results whatsoever from their budget. Um, Ginger being the most successful. And so, my proposal was, let's just take what Ginger does and apply that to everybody else.
Yeah.
And it was contentious because it meant, I had to, in some ways, take the control of decision making out of the hands of really smart, well-intentioned people. And I talk about in the book about, this was not their fault. They thought their job was to do what the salesperson told them to do, or what their boss told them to do, or what some executive in the product team told them to do. But they were smart people, and when we finally got them to see that, if they thought of marketing as a strategic effort or initiative to drive business results, they would do things very differently. And that's how we started with, we did a pay per lead program that ultimately ended up being funded, to the tune of $5 million. It delivered $24 million in revenue. And folks like Ginger and myself sort of rode that wave of success just by stopping the things that didn't work and pushing back against the culture that was kind of traditional.
Well, I hope Ginger can hear the rest of this podcast because her head's getting bigger as we're flattering her. I've mentioned her on a couple of shows. She's been a great friend.
Yeah.
But it's hard to even fathom 52, 53. But even if it's not that many, let's say it's even 30 companies, that must have put some callous on you, though, to some degree, to spend that much time changing jobs because a bad boss affected you that way. And I agree. I mean, most of the companies I've left is, I worked for one company where I was employee of the year in a division, and then, the redheaded stepchild when I changed bosses, and it was the
Yeah.
reason I left. And it's my story's not any more or less, different. Now I work for one of the greatest bosses I've ever had in my life, and it so changes your attitude, but it can
Yeah.
also put some callous on you, if you will. How do you keep yourself from with having that empathy in you to where it doesn't turn you the wrong way to be a good manager, a good leader, mentor, and so on?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it comes naturally for me, but it to me, it just comes down to it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons I wrote the book is that it's counterintuitive to think that by focusing on others and being a positive force in the world that you can actually get what you want.
Exactly.
And I think that was, part of the sort of the subtitle, how empathy delivers bigger profits and a better life, is that when we focus on others, we can get what we want in a world that teaches us in some ways, like you said, where you can become very calloused, and because the world wants to teach us that being mean and sucking is the way to get what you want. um, Managers whose employees hate them are less successful than managers whose employees love them. Employees who find a way to help their teammates are part of more productive teams. In companies where there's higher employee engagement because the company values employee engagement are more successful companies. And so at some sort of very practical level, it just comes down to that's just what works. And so, I don't wake up in the morning and say, let's try to be more positive today. I think it just comes naturally, um, partly maybe my personality, but mainly I think because life has taught me that that's actually how to get what you want. And
Yeah.
it's about focusing on a purpose that's bigger than yourself. But, also, just by helping others, you can really help yourself. I tell just a, I'll retell this quick story from the book. It's actually the beginning and the end of the book, and I tell a story about how I got fired only once in my life, but I got fired. Um, and not to give away the sort of the drama and the intense curiosity that I tried to build in the book, which
Right.
which I'm not sure worked. But in the end of the book, I say the story isn't over once I got fired. At the end of the book, I talk about how I actually got rehired within 2 weeks. The president of the board went and fired the guy that fired me because all of my colleagues went,
Yeah.
well, not all of them, but a group of my colleagues went and complained and said, Brenner came to us, asked us what we thought we should do with our marketing. He went to our customers and got their input and presented a logical plan that would have driven growth for our company and got fired for it. And that's not right. And the president, fired the guy that fired me and rehired me. And so it's a great example of when you focus on other people and try to do the right thing, you can actually not only get what you want, but you can build an supporters that can really save you when you're down.
Well, one of the things that you talk about, and I love your newsletter, and
Yeah.
it's you just touched on empathy and
Mm.
the Marketing Insider Group's newsletter. It's really catnip because probably 1 out of 5 for me is talking about a topic that so few people understand, especially as you want to talk about a social hack and how
Yeah.
to get things recognized. I mean, one of it starts with two, looking at your customers, which not enough companies do, but then second, they just don't look enough at their employees and how to keep them engaged.
Yeah.
And so you cover that a lot in this book as well. But selling your boss on empathy. This was the one chapter that I thought people would love to see, but
Yeah.
probably have their hardest time wrapping their arms around. And I'll tell you why. I have worked for companies that had, and people could probably say that when they worked for me in the past, when they've had uh, tough or bad managers but great companies, or
Mhm.
just the opposite. I've had plenty of people tell me that the companies that we worked for sucked, but I was a good
Mhm.
manager. Now those were rarer than the other times, but
Mhm.
it's to me, I found it quite often speaking to a lot of people where they may work for a great company and their manager sucks, or uh, the company sucks, but they're staying because they have a great manager. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I found a lot of times that you don't get enough alignment as a culture
Hmm.
with employee empathy. And I'm curious as to how you see that. And then if you could kind of explain out that chapter on how to sell your boss on being that, because it
Hmm.
starts with the closest person you are attached to, which is your boss.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of my most I think I mentioned this in our last conversation, but one of my most tweeted quotes is, that the reason that we do so much stuff that doesn't work inside corporate America and the world, and marketing more than any other is because somebody asked us to do it.
Yeah.
And so but that's easy to then say, yeah, that's right, it was that grumpy old curmudgeonly boss that made me do it. um, and but I then try to empower my audiences to say, no, it's our fault. So there's a couple of things. Number one, when you start a job, I suggest what I call the one question survey. The one question that every interviewee should ask their boss is, do you support the new ideas that are presented to you from your team? Now that's a loaded question, because number one, a lot of people say, oh, yeah, so of course, and then you need to ask for examples and probe a little bit. But it tells the hiring manager two things. It tells them, number one, I will not be micromanaged. It tells them, number two, I'm expecting you to support me and the innovations that I want to try to propose, because I'm not here to just do what I'm told. It tells them I'm not here to just do what I'm told. I'm here to make an impact and to focus on something that has a higher purpose. And so it really starts to set the ground rules right from the very beginning. And you very quickly learn. A friend of mine, um, she didn't recently joined a company and left after 6 weeks, and we talked about this question, and she didn't ask it, largely because I think she knew deep down what the answer was going to be. She could tell that it was a micromanaging culture.
Hmm.
Um, and ended up leaving because of it. It was a subconscious resistance, I think, to the real answer. But so it starts with there. Then I think once you get into, and this is one of the stories I tell in the book, is the "you can't have a cake and tell me how to bake it" analogy. I had a difficult boss for a good couple of months, and we are friends today, and we were at it like nothing you would ever believe, like almost to the point where I was probably becoming insubordinate,
Hmm.
because he kept asking me, like, here is here's a pound of flour, give me a chocolate cake. And I'm like, dude, I can't make a chocolate cake with flour, like I need other stuff. And we just kept going back and forth, and I kept refusing to do things I knew wouldn't work. He kept continuing to ask me to do it, and then finally I said, look, you want a cake, right? Yeah. And I said, well, I know how to bake great cakes. Like, I make chocolate cakes and vanilla cakes, and you name the kind of cake, I will give it to you, because I'm good at baking cakes. But you can't tell me that you want a cake and tell me what ingredients to use and how to bake it, because that's what I do best. And once we had that conversation, it was really cool, because in a meeting that we were in about 2 days later, he used the analogy with one of our sort of internal stakeholders, who was very difficult, to deal with as well. And it was like, yeah, this is going to work. And then we ended up. It was actually the program I was talking about with Ginger, where we were essentially trying to centralize and scale a lot of the things that Ginger had been doing, and that was the key moment that we broke through. So if you're in that situation, you need to have that conversation to say, I'm not just here to do what I'm told. I want to have impact. I don't want to do things that don't work. I'm not just here to do what you tell me to do. You hired me, unless you're the janitor, you hired me to think, and because I have experience in creating things that have impact. Tell me, what kind of cake you want, and I will go bake a great cake. And so if you miss the opportunity on the first interview, if you miss the opportunity maybe, or you've had that conversation, I think, with a bad manager, and you're still not seeing traction, the third option is you have to leave. And I think we get to that maybe too quickly sometimes.
Yeah.
I certainly have in my 52 roles, where I was sort of in victim mode. I was blaming the manager or the company, and I left probably too soon. So those are the three sort of steps that I recommend people go through.
So, what are some other steps or ways that people can deal with mean people in the workplace and yet still
Mhm.
have a fulfilling career?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I talk about the airline employee sort of example. A lot of people love to complain about airline employees. My flight was delayed. It's your fault, Miss or Mr. Airline employee. Um, and 80-90% of flight delays and cancellations are due to weather, or mechanical issues that have nothing to do with any person on the planet. And yet we take all of our anger and frustration out on these poor people, and sometimes those people aren't the best at customer service.
Exactly.
And I when people complain about it, I always tell them, I'm like, what, number one, your issues with flying are sometimes probably mostly related to weather and stuff out of people's control. And number two, maybe they were just having a bad day. Maybe you're the 53rd person that complained to them that morning. And if you had a little empathy, you might think and treat them differently. And that's true, I think, when you're dealing with internal folks that might, just suck sometimes. It's like any relationship. I think, I talk about this with managers and or employees. These sort of check-ins where you say, "How are you doing? How am I doing? And how can I help?" Because you take a relationship that might be transactional or might even be on a negative footing, and you immediately turn it into one that builds trust, where you say, I could care about you. B, I'd love to know what you think about my performance, and C, I want to help you. And so, having that kind of a check-in with colleagues, with I loved when I joined most of my roles, I would start an interview all of my peers and all of my peers managers and ask those three questions, um, to try to get a lay of a lay of the land as far as what the key challenges were, how I could help them, and to build trust. And so that's one of the tools that I propose we start using in the workplace a little bit more often.
So, one of the things that I remember reading in the book that I wanted to cover with you as well was you talk about something that I think that not enough people really talk about. It's trying to sell them on the profitability of this.
Yeah.
And I think we can all wrap our heads easily around we need to be nicer, more empathetic, things like that. But when you're trying to drive that kind of change within a company, it so often comes back down to money.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, but it could be not that it isn't wished by even your friendliest CFOs, but if it doesn't translate to dollars, then the C-level suite doesn't understand it. How do we go about trying to explain this to them to where it's beneficial from a dollar and profit standpoint to a C-level exec?
Yeah, this is the Jerry Maguire moment. It's
Exactly.
how do you convince executives of the power of empathy when they don't have any?
Exactly.
And it's we have to show them the money. And it's funny actually. Jerry Maguire has two amazing references in the book, and one is show them the money. The other is the manifesto. And the manifesto in Jerry Maguire, if you don't recall, is kind of a mission statement, which people in the movie try to call a memo, and he keeps saying no, it's a mission statement. It's not a memo, which is just hilarious, I think. But yeah, it's so we have to show them the money. I mean, we have to define, this is part of building the business case, and it's the business case isn't I want to do something because I think it's a right idea. It's I want to propose something because it's going to help us achieve what we want or what we need to achieve. That's the same conversation we need to have with executives. We need to say, you might want to stick a logo on a stadium or a golfer's hat to the tune of $50 million, but what's the ROI of that? Um, I think I can spend $50,000 and deliver 10 to 20 to 100x return on investment by doing A, B, and C. So that's the simple business case. The larger kind of story arc, and chapter 7 is sort of sell the story, and chapter 8 is tell the story. In tell the story, I talk about how when we're presenting to other executives about new ideas, we need to learn to go through a common sort of story arc. And the one that I've always used is the world has changed. What we're doing today sucks, and we need a new approach. And so we all need to know how to build that context in when we're presenting ideas, and that's part of the storytelling. The second part is to make make that grumpy executive the hero of the story. So you have to know what they want. You have to know what their hot buttons are. You have to present a villain, and in every good story, the villain is usually someone that's kind of likable, which is hard to do. So, think of Darth Vader, who was, ultimately Luke's father and came back to the good side. So there's likability in the villain. There's the journey we have to go on. That's where you really lay out the things that you want to do. Um, And sometimes I think we just jump too quickly to the end point, which is, at the end, Luke defeats the dark forces and everybody's saved. No, we've got to take our time and marinate in the pain, because that's how we really get people emotionally involved. And sometimes people chuckle when I say marinate in the pain, but it's what every good movie does. It's what every good story allows us to connect through, is the shared experience of pain, trials, and tribulations. And that's when you get people on board. That's when you build the business case, you sell the story, and you can get people on board.
Agreed. So you also write in here, is it time to get rid of the organizational chart? And other than just being a topic of the book, what also made me think about this was one of the testimonials. When you think about looking at the org chart, is it time to get rid of it? That's really a message that you deliver to the executive team. But
Hmm.
also as a follow up, who did you write this book to? Was it specifically to managers and up, or is it a lot of the, I think sometimes we do forget the lower end of the organizational chart. There's still a lot of people on the lower end, a lot of your junior people who don't understand empathy today. I think
Hmm.
it's very easy for me to think that I could write, takes with a grain of salt. I could write a book, put it in the hands of a CEO, and him think about empathy more, and then want to push that out to his culture. But you've also
Yeah.
got a younger crowd who might be in junior positions who are developing that callus I was talking about, or maybe they're scorned by social media every day, and they're the ones that want to be treated more fairly and with more and shown more empathy, but they're
Yeah.
also instigators of it as well. So it's kind of a
Yeah.
twofold question. One, is it time to get rid of the organizational chart? And then two, who are you primarily focused on for this book?
Yeah. Well, so I can answer that, I think, with the answer I propose in the book.
Perfect.
Thankfully. And because part of the challenge I heard was, well, that's great. If you're the CEO, you can make any
Exactly.
change you want. But if I'm the lower level person at a traditional, I always hear the word traditional organization, which means my company sucks.
Yeah.
um, it's an old school. People say old school organization, which means, generally people think that they should be told what to do. So here's what I propose. So the org chart, I'm not an organizational design psychologist, and I'm not proposing that we should get rid of org charts necessarily. What I'm saying is we should think differently about the structure of the organization. And so it kind of starts like this. Org charts are boxes and lines that show us who's above us and who's below us and who tells us what to do. And it started as a model for armies, so that
Right.
people could bark down orders to the infantry, who were putting their lives at risk and needed someone to just think for them. Um, and that model just doesn't fit the world that we live in today. And so what I propose, a way we change our mindset about organizations, is org charts are boxes and lines, but they represent real people, and they don't represent the most important person in the organization, and that's the customer. And so then what would a new model look like? And I call it the bullseye. The bullseye, if you can imagine a bullseye, puts the customer at the center of the organization. And so it fixes this problem of the CEO and the junior professional, because the most important person in that organization, a bullseye organization, is the front line, the
Thank you.
salespeople, the
Yeah.
customer service, the marketers. And then the second most important person are the support people that support those frontline employees. And then the third and the fourth and the fifth and the last, the least most important person, is the executives and the CEOs. Um, now, interestingly, the CEOs and the executive teams need to create a culture that puts the customer at the center. So now we're back to vision and mission and purpose. Um, and so, why would you do all of this? In the book, I use a couple of different examples. Microsoft is one. Stock price up 348% since Satya Nadella came inside the organization, became CEO, and said, we're going to create a culture of empathy. Jim Stengel's book Grow looked at companies that were have mission statements and operational models that looked like they were focused on higher purpose and employee engagement. 400% higher stock prices. So this is not the right thing to do because it's the right thing to do. It's the best way to achieve growth, to make employees more engaged, to make customers more satisfied. So that's kind of, that's the model. and it really solves both. Well, what if I'm the CEO? What do I do? And what if I'm the junior most person? What do I do? Every one of those, kind of individuals inside the organization has a role to play in a customer centric organization. And I just don't think we hear enough about that today.
Agreed. Agreed completely. Well, Michael, you gave the best answer that I've ever heard on any episode. When I
No,
asked you what your favorite shark was, I don't know if you remember that at the time, but I'm going to ask you again, what's your favorite kind of shark and why?
I don't remember. Can you remind me?
Yeah, it was me. Um,
There-
but after that, it was some. I think you picked a hammerhead after that, but
yeah,
um,
yeah.
I
I'll
don't know
give you
if
a different answer.
okay.
I swam with reef sharks or nurse sharks.
Nurse shark is what I would think of as the empathetic shark. So
Exactly. I swam with them. I'll send you that picture. It's pretty cool. It's
that's
one of my
awesome.
favorite bucket list pictures ever.
That's great. So it's like a catfish with teeth.
That's right.
But
That's right.
Michael, it's that special time of the show. Are you ready again for the 5 most interesting, important questions you're going to be asked today?
Let's go.
All right, here we go. Number one, and this is a reference earlier in the show: Luke Skywalker or Lord Vader himself.
I'm going to go with Luke, of course.
Yeah, I figured as much. Number two, speaker or being an author.
Um, hmm, Author, because I think it touches more people.
Interesting. Good point. Number three, sympathy or empathy.
Empathy for sure. Yeah, I think sympathy is what some people call othering
Yeah,
sometimes, and sympathy is a good thing to have if it as long as it empathy is more camaraderie. It's brotherhood, sisterhood, feeling what other people are feeling. I think is more powerful.
great point. Number four, Tom Cruise or Renee Zellweger.
Ooh. I'm gonna definitely go with Renee Zellweger because I mean he's kind of a jerk in most of that movie, and she likes him anyway. So she's following her feelings and makes him become a better person. So I'm gonna definitely go with her. She's more powerful.
It is, but I think it's really interesting when you think of the three main stars of the show, and somehow he almost now looks like the normal one in real
Right.
life. So,
That's right.
jerk or not in the
That's
movie.
right.
All right, number five, again, and the most important question you'll be asked today is biscuits or cornbread.
Oh, cornbread, absolutely one of my favorite foods ever.
All right. Michael, where can people find out more about you, sign up for the newsletter, and get a copy of
Please.
this book?
Yeah, please. So check out Mean People Suck on Amazon. You can check me out at Marketing Insider Group or check out the book, more about the book at meanpeoplesuck.com. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael, for being with us again today on A Shark's Perspective.
Awesome.
So there was my part two with Michael Brenner, the CEO of the Marketing Insider Group, a CMO influencer, keynote speaker, leading voice on B2B and content marketing, and the author of the new book, Mean People Suck. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, most of the times he left jobs were because of his managers, not the companies. And if I had a nickel for every time this happened to me as well, then the coins in my pocket would jingle loudly. People quit bad bosses more than they quit bad companies. You've likely quit bad bosses before, and you're likely to have someone quit on you for that same reason in the future. But remember that it is often because of the culture in a company that helps enable that managers to remain that way and to fall into that bad culture trap. I love his one question survey going in on the interviews. Do you support new ideas that you get from your team? Set ground rules and expectations, and it can help you start being honest and not being micromanaged. And if all else fails, like he said, move on if you can, but still be nice. It shouldn't jade you at all ever towards your customers. Second, love how he talks about putting the focus on the customer first, and then the org chart doesn't matter so much. Then the C-suite is built on focusing on empathy, and the culture becomes pervasive, and you build your company around that sort of theme. Great example was Satya Nadella at Microsoft and how they've increased profits when they enabled more empathy with that focus that created a culture change within the company. And there are plenty of other examples in his book. So show your company the money, but back to his point, I often ran about whether senior or junior in your role, make sure the customer is the focus. Third, he reminds us that this isn't a blame, it's a call to action. It's not for pointing fingers elsewhere. Have some empathy and change your life. Focus on a purpose that's bigger than yourself and help others. Focus on others, and it will take you far, I promise. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. It is time for you to go out and be a shark, but after you've heard this, just make sure it's an empathetic shark. Join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.